Meet Zorglix the Conqueror, terror of 17 star systems and the Dominion Empire's most elite mind control parasite. If you're picturing some slimy slug thing, think bigger. Think microscopic perfection. Think a being so advanced that entire civilizations have surrendered at the mere mention of his designation number. For 300 cycles, Zorglix has been the gold standard of consciousness hijacking. Vulcarians? Child's play. Those crystal-brained Arcturus monks who claim to have transcended physical thought? Please. Zorglix once made their entire monastery do the galactic equivalent of the chicken dance while live-streaming it across 47 planets. So when the Dominion High Command assigned him to this backwater planet called Earth, Zorglix was honestly a little insulted. I mean, come on. These humans hadn't even figured out faster-than-light travel yet. They were still burning fossil fuels and arguing about whether pineapple belongs on pizza. This was grunt work, not a job for someone of his caliber. But orders were orders, and Zorglix had his reputation to maintain. Plus, the High Command promised him a nice vacation on the pleasure moons of Vega afterward. So really, how hard could it be? He'd done his homework, of course. Human brains. Standard carbon-based neural networks. Roughly 3 pounds of squishy gray matter. Nothing fancy. The intelligence reports showed they spent most of their time staring at glowing rectangles and consuming caffeinated beverages. Honestly, Zorglix had dealt with more complex organisms in his sleep. The plan was elegantly simple. Phase 1. Infiltrate a human host. Phase 2. Use said hosts to access their global communication networks. Phase 3. Broadcast a compliance frequency that would turn the entire species into obedient servants of the Dominion. Phase 4. Profit. Well, not profit exactly, but definitely a commendation and maybe a promotion to the Andromeda sector. Zorglix selected his target with the precision of a master craftsman. Dave McKenzie, age 28, unremarkable in every conceivable way. The human was currently sitting in what appeared to be a small dwelling unit, staring at yet another glowing rectangle while consuming what the species called pizza. Perfect. Ordinary, isolated, and probably wouldn't even notice the invasion until it was far too late. With the confidence of someone who had never failed a single mission, Zorglix began his infiltration sequence. The molecular phase shift went smoothly. The neural barrier penetration was textbook perfect. Entry into the host's bloodstream? Flawless. Within seconds, Zorglix had reached the target's brain and begun his integration with the host's consciousness. This was always his favorite part. The moment when he felt the host's mind trying to resist, then gradually surrendering to his superior intellect. The sweet satisfaction of another easy victory. Except something was wrong. Very, very wrong. Instead of the orderly, predictable neural pathways he'd expected, Zorglix found himself tumbling headfirst into what could only be described as a mental tornado made of pure, unfiltered chaos. And somewhere in the distance, he could swear he heard the host thinking about whether hot dogs were technically sandwiches. If Zorglix had possessed a physical form capable of having migraines, he would have had the mother of all headaches right about now. Because Dave McKenzie's brain wasn't just chaotic, it was like someone had taken every random thought in the universe, thrown them into a blender, and hit the puree setting. The sheer volume was overwhelming. Most species Zorglix had conquered had maybe 3 or 4 active thought streams at any given time. Dave had approximately 47 running simultaneously, and none of them made any logical sense. There was the primary stream, which was currently focused on whether he should order more pizza or finally do his laundry. Fair enough, basic survival decisions. But then there was stream number 2, which was playing what appeared to be the entire soundtrack to a movie called Shrek 2 on repeat. Stream 3 was worried about a conversation Dave had with someone named Janet 3 weeks ago, and whether he'd sounded weird when he said goodbye. Stream number 4 was trying to remember if he'd locked the front door. Stream 5 was composing an angry letter to his internet service provider. Stream 6 was wondering if penguins have knees. Stream 7 through 15 were all different variations of, I should probably go to bed soon, even though it was only 7:30 in the evening. And that wasn't even counting the background processes, the random memories that would suddenly surface for no reason. The part of Dave's brain that was apparently dedicated entirely to remembering embarrassing things he'd done in middle school. The section that stored every commercial jingle he'd ever heard, which was apparently a considerable collection. Zorglix tried to establish basic motor control. Simple stuff. Make the host stand up, walk to the communication device, Begin the compliance broadcast. He sent the neural command with all the authority of 3 centuries of successful conquests. Dave continued eating pizza and scrolling through something called Reddit. Okay, perhaps the human was more resistant than expected. Zorglus tried again, this time with more force. He was Zorglus the Conqueror, damn it. He'd made entire armies march into the sea because he told them it was a good idea. Dave's response was to suddenly remember a song from when he was 12 and start humming it under his breath while reading about conspiracy theories involving birds. This was impossible. Zorglus had never encountered a mind this utterly, completely, chaotically disorganized. It was like trying to conduct a symphony orchestra where every musician was playing a different song, in a different key, while also juggling and thinking about their grocery lists. And the worst part? Dave seemed completely unaware that anything unusual was happening. He was just sitting there, living his life, while his brain generated enough mental white noise to jam every psychic frequency in the known galaxy. For the first time in his illustrious career, Zorglitz began to suspect he might be in trouble. By hour 2 of what was supposed to be a 10-minute operation, Zorglex had moved from suspicion to full-blown panic. He'd tried every technique in his considerable arsenal, and Dave Mackenzie was still sitting on his couch, completely oblivious to the fact that his brain was currently hosting the most feared consciousness in the outer spiral arm. The motor control attempts had been a disaster. Zorglitz would send a clear, authoritative command to stand up, and Dave's brain would somehow intercept it, process it through what appeared to be 17 layers of anxiety and overthinking, and translate it into, I should probably stand up, but first, let me finish this video about cats that look like celebrities. Then Dave would watch the entire video, plus 6 related ones, while part of his brain composed a mental grocery list and another part worried about whether he'd been too harsh in his review of a restaurant he'd visited 2 months ago. Memory access was even worse. Zorglus needed tactical information about human society, their leaders, their communication networks. What he got instead was an exhaustive catalog of every awkward social interaction Dave had experienced since kindergarten, arranged in no particular order and cross-referenced with random song lyrics. He tried to find Dave's knowledge of global politics, and instead discovered a detailed mental database of every dog Dave had ever seen, complete with rankings of their goodness, and whether he thought they knew they were good dogs. The really infuriating part was that Dave clearly had the information Zorglex needed. The human worked in something called IT support, which sounded promising. But when Zorglex tried to access those memories, he found them buried under layers of resentment about people not turning their computers off and on again, mixed with elaborate fantasies about winning the lottery and moving to a small island somewhere. That's when Emma Rodriguez walked in without knocking, because apparently Dave had given her a key at some point and hadn't thought to mention this rather important detail to the parasite currently occupying his brain. Dave, why are you sitting in the dark talking to yourself? She asked, flipping on the lights. Zorglex realized with growing horror that his attempts to establish communication had been leaking out as actual speech. Dave had been sitting there for 2 hours, apparently having an animated conversation with thin air about the proper procedure for galactic conquest. Oh, hey Emma, Dave said, his voice sounding perfectly normal despite the fact that Zorglex was currently screaming psychic obscenities directly into his cerebral cortex. I was just, practicing for this thing. What thing? Emma asked, crossing her arms in a way that suggested she was not buying whatever excuse was about to come out of Dave's mouth. This was Zorglex's chance. He could use Emma as a backup host, someone with a hopefully more organized brain. He began preparing for an emergency transfer, gathering his essence for a quick jump between hosts. Except Dave's brain chose that exact moment to remember every episode of a show called The Office simultaneously, creating what could only be described as a mental feedback loop of secondhand embarrassment and workplace humor. The psychic interference was so intense that Zorglev's transfer attempt got scrambled mid-execution. Instead of jumping to Emma, he found himself somehow more deeply embedded in Dave's consciousness, tangled up in memories of someone named Jim making faces at a camera. I'm practicing my presentation skills, Dave said weakly, while Zorglex discovered an entire section of human memory dedicated to things called memes, and immediately regretted everything about his career choices. Emma stared at him for a long moment. Dave, you work in tech support. When have you ever given a presentation about anything? And that's when Zorgless realized he wasn't just trapped in the most chaotic mind in the galaxy. He was trapped in the most chaotic mind in the galaxy, and that mind was a terrible liar. Hour 4 was when Zorglex officially lost what remained of his sanity. Not that he'd admit it to the Dominion High Command, assuming he ever made it out of this nightmare alive to file a report, which was looking increasingly unlikely. The problem wasn't just that Dave's brain was chaotic, the problem was that it was starting to affect Zorglex himself. See, mind control parasites work by synchronizing with their host's neural patterns. It's supposed to be a one-way street where the parasite gradually overwrites the host's personality with their own superior consciousness. Except Dave's personality was apparently made of some kind of mental Teflon, because nothing was sticking to it. And worse, it was starting to rub off on Zorglex. For the first time in 3 centuries, Zorglex found himself experiencing something he'd only observed in his victims: anxiety. Pure, undiluted human anxiety. And not the rational kind, like, oh no, I'm being invaded by an alien parasite. No, this was Dave's special brand of anxiety, which meant Zorglex was suddenly worried about things like whether people thought he was weird for putting ketchup on scrambled eggs, and if that girl at the coffee shop yesterday was being genuinely friendly, or just doing her job. It was horrible. It was irrational. It was completely paralyzing. And it was getting worse. Dave, seriously, who were you talking to? Emma pressed, sitting down on the couch next to him with the determination of someone who wasn't going anywhere until she got answers. Dave's response was to panic internally about lying to Emma, which created a feedback loop where he started overthinking his overthinking, which made Zorglex panic about Dave's panic, which made Dave panic about feeling panicked for no apparent reason. In desperation, Zorglex tried to access his emergency communication protocols to call for backup. Surely the Dominion had contingency plans for situations like this. Surely somewhere in their vast databases was a protocol for what to do when the host brain is so chaotic it breaks your parasite. But when he tried to establish a psychic link with the mothership, Dave's brain somehow intercepted the signal and filtered it through his memories of trying to get customer service on the phone. The result was that instead of reaching Dominion Command, Zorglex found himself mentally connected to what appeared to be an automated system, asking him to rate his invasion experience from 1 to 10. I don't know, Dave said to Emma, his voice climbing an octave. Maybe I'm having a breakdown. Do you think I'm having a breakdown? People have breakdowns, right? That's a normal thing that happens to people. Emma's eyes widened with concern. Dave, you're starting to worry me. Have you been sleeping? Eating actual food instead of just pizza? And that's when something truly terrifying happened. Dave's subconscious, apparently deciding that this whole situation was getting out of hand, did something that Zorglex hadn't known was possible. It started showing him every embarrassing memory Dave had ever formed, all at once, in what could only be described as a mental highlight reel of social awkwardness. There was Dave in 3rd grade calling his teacher Mom. Dave in high school, waving back at someone who was waving to the person behind him. Dave last week, saying you too when the movie theater cashier told him to enjoy the show. Dave 5 minutes ago, lying badly to his roommate about practicing presentation skills. The memories weren't just playing in sequence. They were overlapping, creating a cascading wave of secondhand embarrassment that was so intense, it actually caused Zorglex to experience something he'd never felt before: the urge to hide under a rock and never come out. For a parasite who'd spent 3 centuries in perfect control of every situation, it was devastating. And somewhere in the chaos of cringe-inducing memories and escalating anxiety, Zorglex made a discovery that shook him to his very core. Dave wasn't resisting the invasion. Dave didn't even know there was an invasion to resist. Dave's brain was just naturally this chaotic, this disorganized, this utterly immune to any form of logical control. Which meant that humans weren't just difficult to conquer. They were literally unconquerable, because you can't take control of something that isn't under control in the first place. By hour 6, Zorglex had officially abandoned all pretense of professional dignity and done something that would have gotten him court-martialed by the Dominion High Command if they'd known about it. He broke protocol and directly contacted his host. Dave, he said, speaking directly into the human's consciousness with all the authority he could muster, which at this point was approximately 0. We need to talk. Dave, who was currently in the middle of explaining to Emma why he'd been acting weird by making up an increasingly elaborate story about food poisoning, paused mid-sentence. Did you just hear that? He asked Emma. Hear what? Never mind, Dave said, then thought back. Hello, who is this? Am I having a stroke? Is this what a stroke feels like? No, you're not having a stroke, Zorglex replied, trying to maintain some shred of his former intimidating presence. I am Zorglex the Conqueror, terror of 17 star systems, elite operative of the Dominion Empire, and I have taken control of your primitive brain for the purposes of planetary conquest. There was a pause, a very long pause. Then Dave thought back. That's weird. Are you the reason I've been thinking about hot dogs all day? What? No! That's just your brain being whatever it is your brain does. Look, this isn't important right now. What's important is that you need to help me get out of here. Another pause. Wait, you want out? Aren't you supposed to be, conquering me or whatever? Zorglex would have sobbed if he'd still possessed tear ducts. Dave, I have been trapped in your mind for 6 hours. In that time, I have experienced anxiety attacks about conversations that happened 3 years ago, learned the complete lyrics to something called Call Me Maybe, and been forced to relive every awkward moment of your existence in excruciating detail. I am begging you, please, just let me go. That does sound pretty rough, Dave admitted. But how do I let you go? I don't really know how any of this works. Just concentrate on not thinking about me. Pretend I'm not here. Push me out of your consciousness. Okay, I'll try, but you should know that telling me not to think about something is pretty much guaranteed to make me think about it more. It's like when someone says don't think about elephants and then all you can think about is elephants, And immediately, Dave's brain flooded with elephant thoughts. Elephants at the zoo. Elephants in movies. The elephant in the room, which was ironically appropriate. Dumbo. Babar. That viral video of the elephant painting a picture. Whether elephants really never forget, and if so, how traumatic that must be for them. Stop thinking about elephants, Zorgleus screamed. I can't, you made me think about them. This is like the time Emma told me not to think about breathing, and then I spent 3 hours manually controlling my breathing because I'd forgotten how to do it automatically. That's when Emma, who had been watching Dave apparently have a conversation with himself for the past 10 minutes, stood up with the expression of someone who'd reached the end of her patience. Okay, Dave, I'm calling Martinez. Something is seriously wrong with you, and I'm not leaving until we figure out what it is. No, wait, Dave said out loud, jumping up from the couch. I can explain. There's an alien in my head. Emma stopped dialing. I'm sorry, what? There's an alien parasite in my brain. His name is Zorglex, and he's trying to conquer Earth, but he's really bad at it, and now he wants to leave, but he doesn't know how. Zorglex realized this was his chance. If Emma thought Dave was having a mental breakdown, she might get him professional help, which might involve brain scans or medication that could disrupt the parasite's hold. It was risky, but at this point, any chance of escape was worth taking. Tell her about the Dominion Empire, he whispered desperately. Tell her about the 17 star systems I've conquered. Give her details only an actual alien would know. So Dave started talking. He told Emma about interstellar politics, about species she'd never heard of, about technologies that wouldn't be invented for centuries. He described the mothership in perfect detail, explained the invasion timeline, even gave her the coordinates of the Dominion homeworld. Emma listened to all of this with growing amazement, not because she believed in aliens, but because she'd never heard Dave display this level of creativity or imagination in the entire time she'd known him. Dave, she said slowly. This is either the most elaborate psychological break in history, or you're telling the truth about having an alien in your head. I'm telling the truth, Dave insisted. Zorglex, tell her something only you would know. But Zorglex had made a terrible mistake. In his desperation to convince Emma, he'd given Dave access to classified information about Dominion military operations. Information that, if it fell into human hands, could compromise not just the Earth invasion but the entire Outer Spiral conquest campaign. And Dave, being Dave, had just shared all of it with his roommate, who was currently recording the conversation on her phone, just in case. Oh no, Zorgleus whispered. Oh no, oh no, oh no. The High Command is going to execute me. If they ever find out I leaked classified intel to a human because I was having an anxiety attack. Wait, Dave thought back. You guys execute people for that? That seems a bit harsh. Have you considered therapy instead? And that's when Zorglex realized that somehow, in the span of 6 hours, he'd gone from being the hunter to being the hunted. And the worst part was, Dave was genuinely trying to be helpful about it. What happened next would go down in Dominion history as either the most embarrassing intelligence failure in the Empire's existence, or the most brilliant psychological warfare operation ever conducted by a primitive species. Historians are still debating which. Dave's solution to the alien parasite problem was characteristically simple and devastatingly effective. So, he said, settling back onto the couch while Emma frantically Googled signs of alien invasion on her phone. It sounds like you're really stressed out about this whole situation. Have you tried just leaving? Of course I've tried leaving, Zorgles shrieked. I've been trying to leave for hours, but every time I attempt to disengage, your brain does something completely insane and I get pulled back in. Just 5 minutes ago you started thinking about whether penguins have feelings, and somehow that created a mental vortex that trapped me in a loop of penguin anxiety. Oh yeah, that happens sometimes, Dave said casually. My brain gets stuck on weird stuff, but have you tried not trying so hard? What does that even mean? Well, you know how when you're trying really hard to remember something, you can't remember it, but then when you stop trying, it just pops into your head? Maybe it's like that. Maybe you're trying so hard to leave that you're making it impossible to actually leave. Zorglex paused. In 3 centuries of conquest, no one had ever suggested that the solution to a problem might be to stop trying to solve it. It was so illogical, so counter to everything he'd been trained to do, that it might actually work on whatever passed for logic in Dave's brain. Fine, he said desperately. Fine, I'll try not trying. So Zorglex stopped fighting. He stopped pushing against Dave's chaotic thought patterns. He stopped trying to impose order on the mental hurricane. Instead, he just let go. And immediately, like a cork popping out of a bottle, he found himself ejected from Dave's consciousness with such force that he actually overshot his intended exit trajectory and ended up floating somewhere near Dave's left nostril. Oh, Dave said, blinking in surprise. I think it worked. I feel less crowded in here. Emma looked up from her phone. Wait, the alien is gone? Yeah, I think so. Zorgles, you still in there? I'm out, came a tiny, traumatized voice from somewhere near Dave's face. I'm actually out. Oh, thank the cosmic void, I'm out. What followed was the most pathetic victory speech in the history of galactic conquest. Zorgles, now reduced to a barely visible speck of alien consciousness, spent 20 minutes explaining to Dave and Emma why humans were the most terrifying species in the known universe. It's not that you're strong, he said, his voice shaking with residual trauma. It's not that you're smart. It's that you're completely, utterly, absolutely impossible to control because you're not even in control of yourselves. Your brains are like trying to conduct a symphony orchestra during an earthquake while everyone's on fire, and also thinking about lunch. That's actually a pretty accurate description of what it's like being human, Emma admitted. I'm going to have to file a report with the High Command, Zorglex continued, now floating in lazy circles around Dave's head like a depressed microscopic balloon. I'm going to have to tell them that not only did I fail to conquer a single human, but that I accidentally gave away classified military intelligence, had multiple panic attacks, and ultimately had to be rescued by my intended victim. That does sound like a rough day, Dave said sympathetically. Are you going to be okay? And that question, asked with genuine concern by the person who had just accidentally defeated the most feared parasite in the galaxy, finally broke what remained of Zorglex's professional composure. No, he wailed. I'm not going to be okay. They're going to demote me to something embarrassing like asteroid mining or customer service. My reputation is ruined, and worse, I'm going to have to tell them that humans are unconquerable, not because they're advanced or powerful, but because they're so chaotically, randomly, impossibly weird that our entire invasion strategy is fundamentally flawed. Well, Emma said, putting her phone down, if it makes you feel any better, I recorded everything. So at least you'll have evidence that you're not making this up. Zorglex went silent for a long moment. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, You recorded classified Dominion military intelligence. Yep. Already uploaded it to the cloud, too. Just in case. The cloud? Yeah, it's this thing where we store data on remote servers so it doesn't get lost. Pretty much every human with internet access could potentially see this information now. There was another long pause. Then Zorglex began to laugh. Not the evil laugh of a conqueror, but the broken, hysterical laugh of someone whose world has just completely fallen apart. That's it, he said. That's actually it. In the span of 6 hours, you've not only defeated me personally, but you've accidentally compromised our entire military operation and probably doomed any future invasion attempts. And you did it by being helpful. Dave shrugged. I just figured if you were having a bad day, maybe sharing might help. That's what friends do. Friends? Zorglex's voice cracked slightly. Sure, you've been living in my head for 6 hours, that's gotta count for something, right? And that's how the most feared mind control parasite in the galaxy ended up sobbing invisibly on Dave Mackenzie's couch while a human patted the air near where he thought the alien might be. And his roommate ordered pizza because she figured everyone involved had probably had enough drama for one day. 3 days later, the Dominion High Command received Zorgloff's report and immediately classified Earth as a level Omega threat, which roughly translates to, do not approach under any circumstances, population is weaponized chaos. The planet was quarantined, not to protect the galaxy from humans, but to protect the galaxy's sanity from whatever it was humans did instead of thinking. And somewhere in a small apartment, Dave Mackenzie went back to his normal life, completely unaware that he'd single-handedly prevented an alien invasion by being exactly the kind of person he'd always been. A little weird, a little anxious, and unexpectedly kind to someone having the worst day of their 300-year career.